This presentation is brought to you by the SDG Decision Education Center.
Hello, and welcome to Successfully Negotiating from a Distance, Overcoming Physical and Psychological Challenges, brought to you by SDG Decision Education Center and Texas Executive Education at the University of Texas. I'm Lynn Slattery, Director at Texas Executive Education and manager of a portfolio of open enrollment programs designed for busy professionals. This portfolio includes the Strategic Decision and Risk Management Certificate Program, which brings together the academic research and practical application teaching of UT faculty and 35 years of experience in strategy consulting and decision education of SDG, and serves as the basis for our webinar series. We are proud to be partnering with SDG on this series. Today I'm excited to have Dr. Galen Paulsen, an expert in negotiation, here with us to explore the differences we experience when negotiating from a distance. Dr. Paulsen is the Associate Dean and Director for Texas Executive Education and a faculty member in the Department of Management at UT Austin's McCombs School of Business. His research and focus on how we interact strategically with people, including in negotiation, conflict management, persuasion, change, and interpersonal communication skills. Dr. Paulsen, I'll turn the floor over to you to begin.
All right. Well, thank you, Lynn. That's great. You sound like a newscaster. So I'm glad to be with you guys today, and we'll explore just a little bit around what happens when you're negotiating, maybe not with someone right next door or someone right in the same office as you, but what happens when we're working at a distance, particularly relative to electronic communication and electronic media. We've done some research around email negotiation in particular and have seen that there are some differences that emerge, some of them surprising and some of them intuitive. And so we'll review some of those things with you all today and give you, I hope, a few nuggets that you can take and think differently as you're approaching negotiations, particularly in an email context going forward. So I think it'll be kind of some interesting stuff to cover, and we'll have some fun. So the trends as we look at negotiating at a more distant kind of level is kind of interesting. So folks have for many, many years have said, okay, face-to-face opportunities are on the decline, that, you know, we've got a broader and broader array of tools available to us so that we engage in instant messaging, we're on the telephone all the time, we're working over email, and that is making the face-to-face environment less and less significant. And yet, if you've been in an airport lately, if you've been on a plane, you know there's no empty seats and that it's a big crowd of folks who are traveling not just for pleasure, but for business. And so there doesn't seem to be a solution that says face-to-face is going away, but we might look at how email and other electronic media are actually supporting or being combined with face-to-face kinds of meetings to maybe make the best use of both worlds. At the same time, we also have digital natives now, folks that are coming into the workforce, and in fact, 50% of the workforce in 2020 are going to be millennials, which is scary for some of you. But the millennials are going, no, that's good, we're taking over. But we have a very different style of communication that might emerge as folks who have really kind of grown up with these kinds of media available to them are entering into the workforce. And so with those kind of thoughts in mind, we're going to be thinking about, you know, what are some of the opportunities, the challenges that are available to us or evident when we're in this kind of email bargaining environment. What happens when we're stuck in this kind of media and may not have all of the tools and resources available to us that are there in a face-to-face environment? So what happens, I guess, when you're negotiating at a distance? What kind of processes change? What kind of outcome impacts might that have? And what are some of the pros and cons that we're going to encounter in this environment? So we're going to give you a chance to kind of weigh in on some of these things. So we've done some research on a few different levels empirically as we've put people into a simulated negotiating environment, giving them a case to work through with someone, either where they're working face-to-face or where they're restricted to working over email purely. And so we've had things where folks are living in entirely different cities. They've never met. They maybe have no hope of meeting even face-to-face. People in different MBA programs have done this with folks at UT, negotiating with people at University of Notre Dame, or in different programs around the UT system where we're negotiating with people in Dallas or Houston or Austin, and they don't expect that they'll ever see each other necessarily. So what's going to happen in those contexts? Will it go well or will it not go so well? So I'll give you a chance to ponder if you're comparing face-to-face and email-mediated negotiations, what kind of things are likely to happen. So our first little survey question for you, or a little quiz, is in which context, face-to-face or email, are you more likely to reach an agreement? I'll give you a chance to weigh in on that, and I'll give you a hint. Some of these things are not intuitive. Some of them are not going to be what you expect. But what do you think in this environment? I'll give you a few seconds to weigh in. All right, so about 3/4 of you are favoring the face-to-face environment, email about 7%, and about 20% of folks saying, no, I don't think it makes any difference at all. And in fact, on some levels, what we end up seeing is that there is a slight edge when it comes to reaching an agreement, to reaching a deal, to working face-to-face. That there was a slight rise in impasses amongst folks who were working over email. And so face-to-face does have a little bit of an advantage, although it wasn't a dramatic difference. It wasn't like a 2-to-1 kind of ratio or anything. It was, maybe at a 5%, 10% higher likelihood of reaching an agreement when you're working in a face-to-face environment. Let's try another one. In which context are you more likely to reach a high-quality deal? So we could measure empirically how creative these deals were mathematically and said, okay, are you reaching a high-quality deal or not? Face-to-face or email, did it help to work face-to-face in that kind of context? Did it make a difference? Okay, so our results are trickling in. Do you think it's more likely to reach a high-quality deal face-to-face or email? So results here, about 68% of folks saying I'd rather work face-to-face. I'm going to reach a higher quality deal there. 21% email, 12% doesn't make a difference. And in fact, what we saw was that it didn't make a difference. And that was surprising, that we expected that people working face-to-face would be able to kind of work more collaboratively, that they would connect a little bit better than folks working over email. But it turns out that there's some really nice advantages to email. And we'll talk about those in just a bit. Ultimately, if folks reached a deal, when they did reach an agreement, those agreements were equal in their quality as they were if they were working face-to-face. So no pain from that front. How about your satisfaction with the deal? Are you going to be happy with the agreement that you've reached? So we'll open up that query. Do you think that it makes you happier, more satisfied with the deal if you're working face-to-face versus working over email? Did you feel comfortable with your agreement? Did you feel like it was a good deal? Didn't matter. So our results here, 40% of the folks think it's more likely to feel satisfied face-to-face. Email, 8%. Most of us, half of us, saying it doesn't make a difference. So, in face-to-face context, people felt much happier. They were much more they were much more confident in the quality of the deals they put together. They felt like they got a good outcome. Whereas in an email environment, even though, as we talked about, the quality of the deal, the creativity of the deal was just as good, people felt less satisfied. They felt like they were maybe exploited. They felt like they were more at risk than when they were working face-to-face. And so, interestingly enough, even though we do well, we don't feel that good about it. And so there are some interesting long-term ramifications to that we'll talk about in a moment. Last one. In which context are the relational markers the highest, leading to a desire to work together in the future? So how did you feel about your connection with the other party? Did you want to work with them in the future? Did you feel good about that opportunity? So let's see what we've got here. So anticipating from what I just answered in the previous question, some of the things that I said, 83% of you are on board. 83% were paying really close attention. That's good. Nobody thinks that email, well, a couple of you maybe, but nobody really is feeling great about that email context from a relational standpoint. So the vast majority of you are on target with this, in that there are folks who are more satisfied with their outcomes in the face-to-face environment, and that translates into their relationship, that they're more interested in working together in the future, working over in a face-to-face environment than when they're working over email. Okay? Less satisfied, as you can see in the bottom here, working over email, which is really interesting then. So we're doing fine in terms of the deals that we're crafting, but we feel really badly And we don't want to work together with these people in the future. So the long-term things are going away. So we're going to look at some of the ways in which we can try and remedy this. But why is this going on is one of the big questions that we're asking. And really, what are some of the underpinnings when we're in a distance-based environment that are causing us to maybe feel a little bit worse? So really what you're constrained to in this type of environment is a verbal channel. That it's all totally about the words that are being exchanged. This is digital information is how we characterize this, that there is a difference between what is being said and how it's said. I mean, it's really just about the content that's being conveyed. And it's very good about communicating information when you're working in a verbal channel. You can convey data and info all day long, but what gets lost is all that relational information. Relational information. Relationships get conveyed non-verbally. Okay, that generally speaking, what happens with your non-verbals is that they all work together. And I'll show you. I'll just kind of go down here. That they work together in the non-verbal channel to actually communicate emotion, to communicate and regulate your conversation. That you know that I'm happy with you by the tone of my voice, with the eye contact that I'm making, with the smile that I have on my face, how closely I might stand to you. They all kind of combine together to communicate relationship, but they're terrible at communicating content. I mean, how much content is being communicated now? I mean, I could, with a nonverbal channel, there's nothing I can convey to you nonverbally. You can't see my face. You can hear the tone of my voice, but really all of this information that we're kind of communicating right now is verbal. And so we have very little. I mean, you can play charades. How long does it take you to guess the movie name when you're playing charades, right? When you're doing just the nonverbals, whereas it can, communicate that so easily and so readily with the verbal. What we do here then is we convey relational information with the nonverbal. And so this is how we connect with people. This is how we regulate our conversations, but really our relationship gets conveyed nonverbal. There's that some of you have heard the thing 93% of communication is nonverbal. And that's complete crap. That 93% of your communication is not nonverbal. 93% of your relational communication is nonverbal. That the way you signal relationships on two levels happens nonverbally. It's about power and it's about liking. That you convey authority, you convey power and status in the nonverbal channel. So if I'm trying to force you to do something, I change the tone of my voice and I convey that kind of authority sound, and that all happens nonverbal. The liking side, same way. I communicate liking and relationship connection with you, again, with my eyes, with my face, with my tone, and how are you? Maybe slap you on the back. But so we touch. All that stuff is nonverbal. Relationship stuff happens nonverbally. The information that you're conveying is conveyed verbally. Email and the digital channels tend toward the verbal. Right? That when you lose the face-to-face opportunities, a lot of the stuff that's getting lost then is going to be the relationship information that's being conveyed non-verbally. So our follow-on question then became, can we deal with this? If you're stuck in a channel that restricts the non-verbal information, how can we overcome this? So again, we were playing with an email kind of environment, and we said, okay, before you do the negotiation, we want you to do one of two different things. Either we want you to spend 5 messages back and forth, just trying to get to know the other person, talking about anything but the negotiation task that they were given. And so it can be, where are you from? The standard kind of small talk. People talked about their job. They talked about what they did for fun. After 1 or 2 times, they had to kind of dig a little bit deeper and get to know the person a bit. The second opportunity that we explored was to say, all right, well, why don't you just talk about 5 or send 5 messages back and forth about the rules of engagement? Like, okay, how are we going to manage this process? All right, I promise that I'm not going to, I'll answer their email within 24 hours. Why don't we set some parameters around that? Or, I promise that this isn't going to become a flame war. We're not going to start going off on each other. If things go badly, that we won't take it personally. And so you kind of set up some rules for how we were going to manage this process together. Could be logistics, could be things that are more relational in their base. And so our questions were, would this impact our deals? Would people be happier? Would they be more comfortable, confident? Would they be willing to work together in the future if we had them engaged in one of these types of activities? So our second round of polls. Would it make a difference if you exchanged some getting to know you messages in the post or in the pre-negotiation process? Would it help us in those post-negotiation perceptions that we saw were damaged with this context? Would it have positive impacts? Would it have a negative impact? In fact, or would it have no difference? Now, most of you are saying, yeah, I think it's going to help. 85% of you are saying, I think it's going to help. Some a little bit questionable. Some saying, I don't think it's going to matter at all. In fact, it corrected for all of those damaging things that we saw in the first round, that it improved the relationship. It actually took it to the point where it was equivalent to the face-to-face. We couldn't tell the difference between the face-to-face and the online kind of environments. And so you can get around this by spending some time getting to know you, by spending some work in that email context, recognizing that that's not natural, that it's going to be a very verbal kind of environment that's very content-focused. And you've seen that in your emails where you may be trying to insert some relational stuff. Hey, how you doing? And you want to put in a little joke, a little bit of humor. And you write something sarcastic, and then you go, haha, and you put it in parentheses, and you go, that doesn't look very professional, does it? You put an emoticon, you put a little smiley face guy on there, and you go, that doesn't work for me either. It looks kind of unprofessional. It looks kind of dumb. But I want to make sure they understand I'm joking, but I'm worried about it, right? I'm worried that my nonverbals aren't correcting for the verbals. And so I erase it, right? And so I need to have this foundation. I need to have kind of that connection with folks. And if I can insert some of those things, and we know that that's expected, we can actually help. How about that second round? What about the rules of engagement conversation? What about if we talk about some of the rules and talk about some of the ways in which we're actually going to try and make sure we adhere to some politeness rules or some relational expectations? How's that going to help us or hurt us? See what we got. So will it improve their relationship? Actually, the majority thought that it would improve the relationship. Small group thinks it's going to hurt the relationship. Some of you think it's not going to make a difference, but about 2/3 of us thinking that it's actually going to help if we can just engage in this. And here was a interesting finding, that it actually hurt us. It actually damaged the relationship. And what we expected was happening here was that it was actually queuing up the risk that people were in, that they realized that, you know what, if I've got to talk about all these rules, I must be in an environment that is a non-trustworthy, at-risk kind of environment. That because trust is largely fashioned up through the nonverbal channels, through me liking and connecting with you and realizing that you're an honest person, I can look you in the eyes, I can see what you're doing as you're talking to me. That stuff all really makes a big difference for whether or not we think someone's honest. All right, and if I know that you're looking away and you're not willing to kind of make eye contact with me, then I say, okay, well, that person's a liar. And I can't see that online. And so I feel like I'm at risk. And when you point up all these different rules, here's what you're going to do. Well, it points up that, man, maybe we're really not very well connected here after all. And that maybe we're actually at risk. And so anytime you start talking about rules, you have to start wondering, well, do they expect that I'm going to cheat? Are they going to cheat? What's going on in this environment? It actually made some things worse. So, some interesting things that are going on here. What do we do when we know that email is really lean, or that, so there's different levels of richness, right? Email is going to be really, really lean. Text messaging might be a little bit more rich in that we put some emotional information in there, right? Some little emoticons and whatnot seem like they're normal. But then we move the telephone. Now you can hear my tone, and then we get the video conference. Now you can see my face, and then eventually you get to face-to-face. What are the right tools that we want to really be leveraging if we're going to try and achieve our objectives in this environment? So face-to-face, we know that we've got a lot of richness here, and that we can then generate the emotional contagion, especially if we've got this positive relationship going on. Then if we can connect, we're actually going to be able to share and explore more effectively, potentially. On the flip side, if I need to really kind of convey something on a power basis, I might need to exert pressure in a face-to-face environment, because that goes away non-verbally too. You can try and put things in all caps, And I don't know that people are going to take you seriously. So it doesn't really have the impact that a face-to-face environment would have. If you're working over media, it's asynchronous in a lot of contexts. If you're working on email, that's a huge benefit. I don't have to be in the same place at the same time as you. It's just going to come with some baggage, some limitations. It's great if you want to establish a record, that it's a really great follow-on tool. So if you want to say, hey, just to summarize the conversation that we just had, you kind of agreed to this, you suggested this, I'm going to work on this aspect, I'm going to try and make some changes over here. Is that what we understood? And that record can be a really powerful tool to reflect back on later, but it also might point up some places where you hadn't really had a meeting in the minds yet. Beautiful thing about the email context is it gives you a lot of time for thought, gives you a lot of time to kind of reflect, and that can yield some creativity. You don't have to be thinking on the fly and have to come up with things so quickly because of the conversation moving along. You can kind of stare at your screen and think, and you can ponder, and that is what oftentimes is going to give us the opportunity for a creative outcome. That time to think and to really reflect as to what a more complex arrangement might look like for us that's going to leverage our differences a bit. Also, if you're in a low power position, you might want to stay in a mediated environment. Nobody can pressure you when you're working online. So maybe saying, I don't want to get face-to-face in this environment. Again, to recognize the power side of it can work to your advantage. So choose the right media wisely if you want to really leverage the best of both worlds. A couple of things from our conversation, that a lean media, like an email, even text messages, mails, letters, things like that, you lose out on the nonverbal, and that's going to impact your ability to communicate on the relational level. That it's possible to substitute a bit, but a lot of times we'll lose all that relational information and lose the connection that makes us feel more satisfied and wanting to work together in the future. You want to build trust and build relationships then via rich channels, ideally face-to-face. If you can't get face-to-face, try to get on the video conference. Try to make sure you're as rich as you can. And if things start to go wrong, don't get stuck. Don't get trapped in the media that you're in. Oftentimes what we see is that people get stuck where I'm confused on something. I send you an email and you send me an email back and it's still confusing. Maybe and we don't feel like it's okay to pick up the phone now. And you'll freak people out when they send you an email and you're confused and you pick up the phone and call them and they'll go, whoa, I was emailing you. And you say, yeah, I didn't quite understand something. And we can remedy it maybe in 20 seconds or 30 seconds on the phone, whereas it might have taken us 3 or 4 emails back and forth that it could have taken 20 or 30 minutes or 2 or 3 days just to clean it up and to clear it up. Lean media are great. They do offer some distinct advantages. The asynchrony is great for follow-up, great for alignment checks, but be careful when you're trying to develop a new relationship or repair anything. Email is not going to be your media. Finally, one option then is to say, do we go rich in the beginning? If I feel like I'm really connected to you, maybe rich in the beginning is fine, and I can lean it out later. But maybe a combo then can be a nice approach. Just don't get stuck. Make sure that you're leveraging the right media for the objective that you're pursuing from a relational standpoint and from a content and information standpoint. With that said, I'll turn it back over to Lynn.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Paulson, for bringing us your expert insights on successfully negotiating from a distance. That was really interesting. I especially love the idea of the 93% of our relational communication is nonverbal rather than our verbal communication. Let's go to our first question. One of our listeners is asking, what if things start to go badly? We started off and now we thought things were okay, and now it's going downhill quick. What can we do to pull that back out?
Yeah, so, I just mentioned that in the email context, you create a record, right, that you can look back on. And the real big problem with this is that if things get said in an email environment and I can't quite interpret your nonverbals with it, I might look at it and we create what we call hostile attributions. Hostile attributions mean I look at it and go, oh, look at what they said. And now I can go back and I can mull. I look at it and then I shut it down and I go back and I reopen the email later and I said, man, they did say that. And it's like they said it to me twice now. Then I go and I look at it the third time and I see the exclamation point that they put in there. I'm like, oh, man. You want to be careful here. I think that because it does create a record, that it can actually kind of compound the impact. So be careful what you're saying online. Be very, very careful with your email kind of comments. And when things go badly, I think some what I said earlier, change the media. Don't get stuck in that email context. Call them up and say, I'm sorry, it's not what I intended. And, here's what I really meant. And so you can really clear that up much more effectively if you're in a more rich environment on the phone or face-to-face if you possibly can.
Awesome. All right, we're getting close, but I do have one time, I think, for one more question. Can you give us any other recommendations for email success, maybe even a little more generally than always in negotiations?
Yeah, one thing to think about is that a lot of times we're going to be better off if we send shorter messages, but more frequent messages. So rather than sending one really big message, you might send 3 smaller messages. I think we've all been in that context where we sent 5 or 6 questions to somebody in an email, and there's really 1 or 2 that we want to get answered that we're desperate to hear the answer to, and they somehow managed to skip those 1 or 2 and they answered the 3 or 4 others. And so you might have been much better off just asking those 1 or 2 at a time and saying, here's another little question. I hate to pepper you with these questions, but here's one that I have for you. I'll have a couple more maybe later on. Here's a question I have. And now they're stuck answering that question and not just picking and choosing like a politician which question that they want to answer within their message. So I would say, shorter messages, more frequent messages would really kind of get your job done.
Awesome. Well, that is all the time that we have for today. We will answer additional questions offline that we couldn't do during our time with you today. We look forward to connecting with you again very soon in the future. Please let us know if there's anything we can do for you, and have a great day.